Thank you for having us here today. My name is Kevin Kavanaugh. My colleague Bob Reeds, as Joanna introduced us. We're representatives from Lauterbach and Amon. We were engaged through the Police Pension Board this year to complete the actuarial evaluation reports. That consists of two different reports. The first of which is referred to as the tax levy report, or the funding report, for the fiscal year ended April 30, 2018. The other report is for financial statement reporting. So what's more relevant to our discussion today would be the funding report. In terms of the process for developing funding recommendations on an annual basis, we gather census data as of the fiscal year end date, so as of April 30, 2018, as well as financial data. We use that in order to develop an actuarial valuation. The other key pieces that work their way into that actuarial valuation are the assumptions and the funding policy that's in place. There's two key components to an annual recommended contribution for the police pension fund. The first of which is referred to as the normal cost. The normal cost is essentially the annual cost of benefit accrual for all of the active officers. So as each officer accrues an additional year of service, they're earning more pension benefit. So that's a contribution that's made each year to fund for those future retirement benefits that will be paid once the officers retire. The other component to each year's tax levy is a payment towards unfunded liability. So currently, the police pension fund is 55.67% funded, which translates to essentially $21.7 million in unfunded liability, meaning that that's the amount that liabilities exceed the current value of the assets. So this year's contribution, the full actuarially recommended contribution comes out to about $2,100,000. About 80% of that contribution is that payment towards unfunded liability. The other 20% of that payment represents that normal cost, or the cost of this year's annual benefit accrual for all the police officers. Some of the key results for the fiscal year, the fund returned about 12% on the market value of assets. The expected return assumption is currently set at 7%. That's an assumption that is a long-term assumption. It plays a key factor in the development of the annual recommended contribution. And one of the other factors I wanted to mention is that we essentially, when Lauterbach and Amon completes a funding report, we complete that on two different bases. One would be the full actuarially recommended contribution, which results in that recommended contribution of about $2.1 million, as I mentioned. The other basis that we develop contribution is on a statutory minimum basis. So the Department of Insurance has outlined funding policy parameters that are required to be utilized when developing a statutory minimum contribution. It's really three key differences from the full actuarial recommended. So the first of which is the method of valuing liabilities. The second of which is the funding percentage target. So our full recommendation is targeting 100% funding versus the Department of Insurance's statutory minimum is targeting a 90% funding for the plan. The third of which is the time period at which you're targeting that funded percentage. So under our full recommended contribution, we're targeting that 100% funding over the next 18 years versus on the statutory minimum basis, it's a target of 90% funding, and that's over a 22-year time period. So this year's statutory minimum contribution comes out to $1,570,000. And so that's essentially the high-level results. And happy to entertain any other questions you have for me, Joanna, or anyone else.
Yes, sir.
Did you say that it's funded at 57% right now?
Correct. Right now, on an actuarial value basis, it's a 55.7%. So that's pretty much right in line with most, the median for all the states, police and fire pension funds is right at 56%. So you're right at the 50th percentile as far as the state goes, but that is where this fund is at currently, is right around the 56% benchmark.
So that's acceptable, or?
Depending who you ask, obviously funding the plan is, as a board's purpose to try to fund it and preserve the benefits payable to the officers. Are you in a dire situation where, things are in real bad shape? No, you're not. But trying to, what we want to see is that trend to be going up. We don't expect to be 100% funded tomorrow because I'm sure there's not $20 million sitting around. So to have a gradual increase of that funded percentage by 100, 200 basis points a year. So by the time that 18-year period of amortization that we're recommending, we can get up to 100% funded mark. This is a long-term plan. We're not expecting everything to go all into place today, but over time, you want to make sure you have a good funding policy and a plan to try to improve the funding of the plan.
Maybe this isn't something you gentlemen can answer, but is there any good reason why we're only at 57%?
I mean, there's lots of reasons why it gets there. One, just funding historically. Two, being assumption changes that happen periodically with regards to your long-term rate of return assumption, the mortality tables that are used. Certain things like that can lead to greater actuarial losses, as we'll call them, which increase your liability, which dampens the funding percentage. So again, whenever assumption change takes place, you don't immediately fund that. You try to smooth that in over time and bear the impact of that over time, and not have to fully recognize it immediately. And those are some of the things that get kind of deferred into the future to build up the future funding.
Remember that Springfield makes the laws for the pension. When I was on a pension board in '94, you used to have to go to 32, maybe 33, and then you got 75%. Well, they came in and moved it to 30. That increases your liability. Now, the mortality rates were just changed not too long ago. Meaning, instead of living to 85 or 90, you're going to live to 100. That means liability goes up. That's the problem with the system we have. Springfield sets the rules and says, these are the rules, you pay. Well, what these two gentlemen are saying, we're about where most pensions are. There's a lot of them that are really, really in trouble. I mean, you don't even want to look at Chicago, believe me. But the point is, when they change benefits, it normally doesn't help the pension plan because the liability goes up. Now, we do have a second tier of officers when they get hired. That's going to help a little bit at this point, because instead of getting your pension benefits determined on your last paycheck, I believe it's 8 years or
86 months.
86 months, something like that.
96 months.
96, 8 years. It's 8 years averaging. So you're not going to get, if you finished off at 100,000, you're not going to get 75% of that 100,000. You're going to have to go back and average it over those 8 years, which then will help the pension plan because it reduces the liability. But like these two gentlemen said, there's a lot of factors that go in it, and this is a snapshot. The snapshot is, if everybody walked out tomorrow, everybody, and they were all able to retire, yeah, then $21 million is short. But they're not walking out tomorrow. Okay? But that's what they look at when they do it. Hopefully that answers your question.
Was there a problem with the prior actuary?
I don't
Tim
recall.
Sharp.
Tim Sharp.
Was there?
He has recently been reprimanded by the American Academy of Actuaries. I don't know the specifics of how it would be related to this fund, in what assumptions he may have used, or anything along that regards.
Well, then what I'd be driving at, that if he made some calculations based on tables or whatever else he used, is that impacting this? And this is why we have to go down this road now.
There's potential for that, say, for example, if he would have used a higher discount rate, would have been lesser funding that would have been requested from the board to make. Sometimes the mortality tables, if he used a more outdated table along that lines, would create a lesser liability, which would then mean lesser funding would be expected. So there are some assumptions, and I'm not going to say Tim Sharp did anything wrong or incorrect. You know,
No,
every actual assumption that's out
Sure.
there is subject to the individual actuary's discretion. And we always have a discussion with the boards to agree on those assumptions prior to setting anything. So, you know, it's usually a collaborative effort whenever there's assumptions in place between the boards and the actuaries.
And you may not be able to answer this question, but if there was a problem based on what he had done, would we as a village be able to take any recourse against him?
That would be something you would have to ask your attorney, and how to quantify what that recourse could be, or the magnitude to what those changes would have been. You know, when you look back, it's always easier to see you should have done this. But
Sure.
looking forward, you know, nobody has that crystal ball to say that we should do this. You know, when you look backwards, you know, you can always say what if.
Sure. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, what we'll do is, I will open it up for any public testimony or public comments, questions or suggestions. I also would like to point out for the minutes that trustee Gelsomino arrived here at 6:07, so that's documented. So if anybody would like to step up and ask a question or comment or whatever, this is your time. Okay, nobody wants to stand up, I ask for adjournment.
I'll make that motion.
Adjournment of Tom Gelsomino. Dan Canals, second. Vote please. 6-0, motion carries.